Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Today we're continuing our examination of Book 6 about the intellectual virtues, looking at Chapter 3. Let's continue, because he talked about the intellectual. The last time he talked about the two parts of the that we call the rational parts of the soul, and he dealt with them, and he described what the virtue is going to be, right? The truthing. Truthing is the kind of thing. The goal of the characteristic of this is to discern the truth. Therefore, the virtue of each is a truling, the ability to discern the truth regarding at the level of things that are that things that are or not, things that don't change, and things that to discern the truth regarding the things that can be otherwise. Right? Those are the things. So the beginning. Let's turn to chapter 3. Beginning, then, from a point further back. Now, literally higher up. So let us begin from a point higher up, further back, higher up, right? Higher up, literally higher up. Let us speak about them again. So therefore, this is almost like a starting point again. Let's think about this again. Let's go back. Let's go back a little bit. So let's start about this. Think about this again. This is where things. So he's kind of dealt with this, and he says, okay, we've gotten to a certain logic in the first two chapters, but let's start again. Let's go back. So, okay. Let us speak about them again, right? So let those things by which the soul attains the truth. So the soul attains the truth, discern truth. By way of affirmation, denial, in other words, the question of, in other words, the way we know things true and false regarding affirmation and denial be 5 in number. So the way the soul discerns the truth, he therefore this is universal. This is not he doesn't then start the question of what is the things that are and the things that emit variance. He doesn't start by this, and then that, this, and then that. He then goes back and in general. Therefore, the things, let us speak about them again, right? He says, so therefore the soul, let those things by which the soul, the intellect, the soul here, attains the truth by ways of affirmation and denial. What is yes and no, right? Terms of this, affirmation. This is the intellectual thing, affirmation, denial. Be 5 in number. They are techne, art, science, episteme, prudence, phronesis, wisdom, sophia, and intellect, nous. For through conviction, supposition, this is okay, hypolepis. So supposition. This is supposition. Through I think conviction. Through supposition. For through supposition and opinion, right? For a kind of a supposition, something I'm making an assumption or opinion, a doxa, right? One can be mistaken. 6 or deceived. Diosudesthesel, diosudesteni, right? Deceived, right? Deceived. What can be mistaken or deceived. So opinion, conviction, or supposition. Supposition. They say conviction, but supposition and opinion. One can be wrong. But regarding true, it's either what is true. In other words, these ways are not supposition. In other words, art, techne, episteme, phronesis, sophia, and intellect are what? Discerning the way, affirmation, and denial. They know the truth. These are the way the soul trues. This is the way the soul trues. affirms and denies, ascerns what is and what is not true or valid or correct. Opinion holds to be correct. Supposition holds to be correct, but it is not. It could be wrong. It can be mistaken. It can be deceived. But these cannot be deceived. Okay. So then he goes in there. He starts out first: science, prudence, wisdom, intellect, art, science, prudence. That would be the logic, right? But what he's going, instead of going to art, he goes into science. Now, what science episteme is if one ought to speak precisely and not attend to the things merely resembling it. So we're going to talk about episteme, what it is, what not the things that it looks like or things that look like it or resemble it, but rather what it is. If one ought to speak precisely and not attend to things that resemble it, but rather what it is, right? What is episteme? What is science? It is manifest from this. We all suppose that we know scientifically. Now, this is note epistemene, which in other words, in Book 6, the term signifies the possession of a scientific knowledge. Right, this epistemetai is not as opposed to knowing acquired some other way. So, therefore, this is a knowing that is done scientifically through this analytic. What he's going to say here, right? We know scientifically does not admit of being otherwise. So therefore, the things emit from episteme, science, does not admit of being otherwise. They either are or they are not. As for the things that do admit to be otherwise, whenever they come into being without being observed, 18 here is a theory, contemplated, right? Observed or theorenai, contemplated, observed or contemplated. So the word here is theorenin. They say being observed or contemplated. In other words, whenever they come into being without being this observed, it escapes one's notice whether they exist or do not exist. So therefore, things that admit otherwise, and whether they come into being without being observed, or they're this. In other words, as for the things that do not admit being otherwise, whether they come into being without being observed, right? It escapes one's notice whether they exist or do not. Therefore, what is knowable scientifically exists of necessity. Exists of necessity. So we don't know it. In other words, if we don't, in other words, he's saying that if we haven't observed it, or is not. This is why observed it is weird here, because I think it is of theorenai. It is literally a theorenin, so contemplated as comes out of the mind or have not been a sin. In other words, escaped. It escapes one's notice that if they exist or not. We don't have an observed. That's why he prefers observed, but being, contemplated in that sense. Or thought, in other words, things that have not been noticed. As for things that do not admit being otherwise, right? Whether they come into being without our observation, it escapes one's notice whether they exist or not, right? Therefore, what is knowable scientifically exists of necessity. It is. It is. It is in that sense. It is. They are. Therefore, it is eternal. They are in that sense, right? And therefore, it's eternal. They are. For the things that exist of necessity in an unqualified sense are all eternal. So, in other words, they have no qualification. Things that exist in an unqualified sense, that they, in other words, that there's not a qualifying category, that they are. So, things that are, and the things that things of a necessity in an unqualified sense are eternal. and the eternal things are not subject to generation, and they do not perish. So something that is, and it is always, or is not always, right? But the question is, if it's not, then we know it. Yeah. In other words, the thing that is, we know its characteristic. We know what it is. It's eternal in that sense. It doesn't change what it is or what it's not in that sense, right? Um, it doesn't generate. It doesn't alter itself. It is what it is. Now he says, therefore, it is eternal, for things that exist of necessity, in an unqualified sense, are all eternal. The things that exist of necessity in an unqualified sense are eternal. And eternal things are not subject to generation and do not perish. Next, further, every science seems to be teachable, right? So every science seems to be teachable. And what is knowable scientifically can be learned. And all teaching proceeds from things previously recognized. So in other words, we understand teaching things have to be recognized, just as we say in the analytics as well, right? He says basically saying the posterior analytics, right? Consider the beginning of the posterior analytics in that sense, right? This is what he says earlier. Some teachings occur through induction. The word epigog literally means to bring. It means literally a beginning or leading to of someone to something, or introducing him to it. In other words, introducing. Induction occurs when one is brought to see a given universal from a prior familiarity with the relevant particulars. Right. This is again posterior analytics in that sense, and topics. This is his philosophical works, right? Through induction. Induction is what? I introduce you to a point that then leads you to a general principle, right? It leads you to an induction. It takes from this to this. So epigog is a literal it means literally a bringing or leading of someone to something. Epigog. So in other words, you take it to this. So you start from this to the universal, right? As well through induction, by by means of syllogism, some some by means of syllogism, through induction, some by means of syllogism. So syllogism, that's that, right? Induction is in fact the starting point or principle, the arche. In fact, a starting point or principle of the universal, whereas syllogism proceeds from the universal. Okay, so therefore, the syllogism that they study, here's the arche, and syllogism comes down from the universal, right? So therefore, that's like, this is when this is at this stage, syllogism. At one sense, induction is we go to that point, right? We go to the universal, and then the next part, syllogism or deduction, you can say, right? Deduction in that sense. It comes from syllogism, it starts at a beginning point and then goes down, right? Whereas syllogism proceeds from the universal. So induction goes to the universal, syllogism or deduction goes from the universal. There are therefore principles, arche, therefore they're arche, from which, okay, they're arche, that's why it's arche principles, arche, right? Arche, there are principles of arche, beginning points, from which a syllogism proceeds, but of which there is no syllogism. In other words, you don't have syllogisms that lead to arche, the beginning point. Now, this is again? These are the arche. These are axioms, right? Axioms. The big arche, or the beginning point is, or the principle is what in logic we'd say an axiom, right? The axiom, the starting point, and you don't you don't you know Syllogisms don't lead you to arches, beginning points. Induction leads you to beginning points, but syllogism or deduction starts with a beginning point, and you don't get this. So therefore, syllogism proceeds, but of which there is no syllogism. There are These are due instead, therefore, to induction. In other words, you induce the arche, the preceding point, the beginning point, the arche. Science, therefore, is characteristically bound up with demonstrations. Science is either the discerning of from a from a let's go in here. What is this? What is it? Would be some teaching through, in other words, all things proceed from things perceived and then are recognized. As we say, some teaching occurs through induction, right? And others by syllogism. Induction is in fact the starting point or principle of the universal, whereas syllogism proceeds from universals. So we go towards the universal, right? We go towards the universal. Okay, so therefore, this is that weird aspect here. Science, syllogism proceeds, but of which there is no syllogism. These do instead to the induction. Induction gets us to get to this gets us to the beginning point. So this the starting point of this, and then the syllogism comes from the arche downwards, right? So science, therefore, is characteristically bound up in demonstrations, right? And so many other things as we add to its definitions in the analytics, right? Again, this is posterior analytics, and this is what he talks about, right? For whenever someone trusts in something, now trusts, this is 22, this is a weird one, that the verb pistero means in the first place simply to trust or have faith, have, pisturin is to have faith in something, and then follow from this, right? In the sense of confidence or certainty one feels as a result of such faith. Aristotle himself uses the verb in the first sentence in book in chapter 4, right? In that sense. So therefore, this is very interesting. Here, and for whenever someone puts trust in, faith in something in a certain way, and the principles are known to him, he has scientific knowledge. So, in other words, if he has, it is his. In other words, he puts faith in it, he puts trust in it, and it's something something in a certain, and puts something in a certain way, and the principles are known to him. The arches are known to him. He has scientific knowledge. For if he does not know those principles to a greater degree than the conclusions, he will be in possession of the science only accidentally. In other words, if he doesn't really know those beginning points, and then in other words, if he does not know those principles to a greater degree than the conclusions he gets, the beginning points, what those things are, and does he know them? If he doesn't really know them, but then gets conclusions, well, that's accidental, right? It's accidental. So he'll be in this possession. To be in possession of the science, you must know the beginning points. You must have the beginning points and know them, and then follow the logic, follow the proper syllogism down to get the conclusion, right? To see what the conclusion is. And if you work well, then you really know what it is. As for what concerns science, then let it be defined in this manner. So he stops science here. in terms of here. So chapter 3 defines episteme, or what he calls science, and it is twofold. One is inductive, this is something again, this is tied to logisticon, right? But logisticon, remember, logisticon earlier was tied to calculation. Remember, they're very interesting. That the earlier account, logisticon was, remember, it was calculation. It was tied to calculation, right? Um, Whereas here, analytica is, we would call this logic, right? This is what we would call logic. We today will call what he says here logic, the logic. So science, in our sense, we would call this logic, but for Aristotle's sense, he understands this as a form of either induction in that sense of going to this, or syllogism, which is kind of deductive reasoning, right? And mostly deductive reasoning in a sense. The syllogism gets you to the arche, or the beginning points, starting points, or the axioms. Um, but syllogism takes you start with the axiom going down, right? And therefore, this is the conclusions. We're going towards the conclusions. So we stop here with the definition of science in that sense. So he dealt with that. Now, what is so interesting is, remember, let's stop for a second at the beginning of this paragraph, this chapter. He started out in the first paragraph with what? Art, science, prudence, wisdom, intellect, right? But then he starts with science. So notice this. We have chapter 3, he starts again and he brings it back. He goes back, starts again, and starts with the 5 ways of truling. Now, before, in the previous chapter, he divided the rational part. Of the soul, there's the rational and the non-rational. And of the rational, there's 2 parts. One that deals with things that are, or eternal things that are, and can only, they are what they are, and they don't change. And the next things are those that admit being other than they are, things that admit variation and change, coming to being and passing away. So these eternal things and these things, and the idea is knowing what is true, would lead us to this respectively, right? The virtue of each of these actions in that sense would be truth is that characteristic that deals with the deciding what it is, and what is the thing that leads us to the greatest degree of truth to each part respectively would be its virtues, right? But now we start again. And what is the way of truing? The truing here begins, and the way he does it, he doesn't follow the logic of the earlier part. He then, instead of giving us what starts with the we get, the first thing we get here is an unchanging, right? Science gives us, science is one of the ways we get to the things that do not vary, that they don't admit being otherwise. Okay, so that's interesting. So he does, even though he says he's starting again, and he gives us a list of things that don't tell us or follow that pattern, but then the first thing he deals with is something that does not admit being a thing, does not admit being variation. So, okay, so therefore, even though starting from the beginning, the pattern of how he delivers this, at least, starts us out with the things that do not admit variation, they are what they are, the eternal things, right? The non-changing things. So let's stop here. If you have any comments or questions or issues, please put it below, and I will respond to it when I see it. If you have something you want to ask about this, and I will respond to it when I see it here, as I said. If you liked it, hit the like button. Please hit the like button. It helps the algorithm. Another thing you can do is share it far and wide. Share it to your friends. Share it on social media. Again, share far and wide. The more you share it, and the more you do something like that, it really helps the algorithm grow. Another thing you can do is you can, if you've not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Again, it helps the channel grow and develop and things. And if you know people who are interested in these things, encourage them to subscribe. Another thing is you can do is if you did okay now, in the sense that if you didn't like it, you thought something was wrong here, you had a criticism, you can thumbs down, but say what it is. Say what thing in the comments. So this way, people can learn and benefit from the comments. This is the purpose of what I'm doing it here for this. If you want to know more about me, want to follow me more, follow me around on my social media, you can check the social media links below. If you want to know more about me as a scholar, or check out my scholarship and check what I do in my scholarship in that sense, you can go to the academic social media below the social media links and find out more about my scholarship in that sense. Another thing you can do is you want to help me to do what I do financially in that sense. You can do that too. You can do so either through subscribes, two mechanisms: Subscribe, Star, and Patreon. These are the two standard platforms that you can do this. Another way, and the other way you can do help is to buy one of my books, and you can do so. The books are listed below. You can do so through your local bookstore or through a online bookstore such as Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. Any of the other ones. Well, that's it. We now turn, as we finished up, we will turn to chapter 4 next time we meet. So see you then. Have a good day. Bye bye.